Good day, everyone. My name is Alicia Baker McDowell, and I'm Vice President and Head of Global Regulatory Consulting at Fortrea. I've been in the industry for over 30 years now, 26 years in a strategic regulatory role. Happy to be here today. So today we'll explore one of the most important developments in modern clinical research, adaptive trial design. Specifically, we'll discuss the draft ICH E20 guideline and what it means for sponsors, regulators, and clinical development teams, and we'll present case studies. Adaptive designs have moved from being innovative exceptions to becoming increasingly important tools for improving efficiency, supporting precision medicine, and accelerating development timelines. Throughout this presentation, we'll review the regulatory evolution of adaptive designs, discuss key principles of ICH E20, and examine several influential case studies that illustrate how these approaches are being applied in practice. Our discussion today will cover 4 key areas. First, I'll provide an overview of adaptive designs and explain why they are becoming increasingly important in drug development. Second, we'll review the evolution of regulatory guidance and examine the role of the draft ICH E20 guideline in establishing global alignment. Third, we'll discuss the strategic implications for sponsors, including planning, simulations, governance, and regulatory engagement. And finally, we'll look at several landmark case studies in oncology and platform trials that demonstrate both the opportunities and regulatory considerations associated with adaptive designs. So why adaptive designs matter? The fundamental advantage of adaptive designs is flexibility. Unlike traditional fixed trials, adaptive designs and adaptive studies allow prospectively planned modifications based on accumulating data while maintaining scientific validity and control of bias. These designs can improve efficiency by reducing time, costs, and exposure to ineffective treatments. This is particularly valuable in therapeutic areas characterized by uncertainty, including oncology, rare diseases, and precision medicine. Importantly, regulators broadly support adaptive methodologies when they are properly planned and when trial integrity and statistical validity are maintained throughout the study. So the evolution of regulatory thinking. Regulatory acceptance of adaptive designs has evolved significantly over the past 2 decades. Early guidance from both FDA and EMA established foundational concepts such as prospective planning, control of type 1 error, and maintenance of trial integrity. But over time, increasing experience with adaptive methodologies highlighted the need for greater international consistency. The draft ICH E20 guideline represents a major step toward harmonization by aligning regulatory expectations across regions and providing a common framework for adaptive clinical trials used in global development programs. Now, that said, while ICH is a guideline, it is not enforceable, so these principles need to be incorporated into local law. So ICH E20, the scope and definition, the guideline defines adaptive trial designs as studies that incorporate prospectively planned modifications based on interim analyses. A key point is that these adaptations must be planned in advance. Unplanned changes made after reviewing emerging data are outside the scope of the guideline. The primary focus of ICH E20 is confirmatory clinical trials intended to support efficacy and benefit risk assessments, although many of the underlying principles are relevant throughout clinical development. So this is specifically speaking to the efficacy trials. However, we do see a lot of adaptive designs early on in development. So what are the advantages of adaptive designs? They offer several important advantages. First, they improve efficiency by allowing information generated during the trial to inform future decisions. Second, they provide ethical benefits. For example, studies may stop early for success or futility, reducing unnecessary participant exposure. Third, they allow evaluation of multiple doses, treatment regimens, or patient populations within a single protocol. And finally, when implemented appropriately, adaptive designs can shorten development timelines while maintaining robust scientific standards. So it's all about trying to move these medications through development faster to get them to the patients that need them. But with adaptive designs come some challenges and regulatory risks. So despite their advantages, they introduce significant complexity. And from a statistical perspective, adaptations can increase the risk of type 1 error inflation and bias in treatment effect estimation. Operationally, knowledge of interim results can influence investigator behavior, enrollment patterns, or study conduct. As a result, regulators scrutinize adaptive features carefully. Sponsors must demonstrate that the benefits outweigh the complexity and uncertainty introduced by the design. This typically requires extensive simulations, robust governance structures, and specialized statistical approaches. The core principles of ICH E20 emphasize 4 overarching principles. First, development adequacy, ensuring the adaptive trial appropriately supports the overall development program. Second, planning adequacy, meaning adaptations are fully pre-planned and scientifically justified. Third, limiting erroneous conclusions by minimizing false positive and misleading results. And fourth, maintaining trial integrity through appropriate operational controls and governance. These principles serve as the foundation for regulatory confidence in adaptive design. So moving on to types of adaptations, adaptive designs can take many forms. Early stopping designs allow trials to conclude early for efficacy or futility, provided boundaries are predefined. Population enrichment strategies focus development on patient subgroups most likely to benefit and require strong biological justification. Treatment selection designs enable comparison and selection among multiple treatment options, but must address multiplicity and selection bias. Response adaptive randomization dynamically alters assignment probabilities based on emerging results, although regulators often express concerns regarding time trends and potential confounding. So moving on to the FDA 2019 guidance versus draft ICH E20. There is substantial alignment between FDA's 2019 adaptive design guidance and draft ICH E20. As I mentioned previously, you need to adopt the ICH principles into the local regulations and the local guidance documents. So both emphasize prospective planning, observation, or preservation of trial integrity, and control of statistical error. However, ICH E20 introduces a broader harmonization perspective and places additional emphasis on estimands, treatment effect estimation, simulation requirements, and overall development strategy. The guideline also provides more detailed recommendations regarding governance, documentation, and evidence needed to support regulatory decision-making. You just need to have those discussions with the regulators separately to make sure what you're proposing is acceptable, and we'll get to more of that later on. So your regulatory engagement strategy, as I was just mentioning, one of the most important success factors for adaptive development programs is early regulatory engagement. Complex adaptive features should be discussed proactively with health authorities well before trial initiation. Mechanisms such as FDA end-of-phase meetings or European scientific advice procedures provide the opportunity to align on adaptive rules, statistical approaches, and development plans. Early engagement reduces uncertainty and often helps avoid costly redesigns later in development. And you need to think about your commercial priorities and where you're looking to commercialize your product so you can plan out where you are meeting with health authorities and the sequence in which you will meet with them so that you can try to harmonize all of the needs to have a global data package to support the needs of all where you're looking to commercialize your product. So moving on to simulation studies. Simulation is truly the backbone of adaptive trial development. Before an adaptive design is implemented, sponsors must demonstrate through simulation that the proposed design performs appropriately under a wide range of scenarios. Regulators expect evaluations of type 1 error, power, sample size implications, treatment effect estimation, and confidence interval performance. Under ICH E20, simulation reports should be transparent, reproducible, and sufficiently detailed to support independent regulatory review. So it's critical that you have a top-notch statistician in the meeting with you and devising all of your plans to move into an adaptive design. So maintaining trial integrity. It's essential and for regulatory acceptance, essential for conduct of the study. Independent data monitoring committees typically oversee interim analyses to ensure unbiased decision-making. Access to unblinded data must be restricted to prevent operational bias and information leakage. Sponsors should implement rigorous confidentiality procedures and maintain detailed records of adaptation decisions. These governance practices help preserve confidence in study outcomes. So now we'll move into case studies, some really interesting examples that we've had over time. The first one I would like to present is the I-SPY 2 trial. It's among the best known examples of an adaptive platform trial. The study simultaneously evaluated multiple breast cancer therapies using Bayesian methodologies and biomarker-driven patient stratification. Rather than treating all patients as a single population, the design focused on identifying therapies most likely to benefit specific molecular subgroups. The approach accelerated learning and became a landmark example of adaptive precision medicine. So what were the regulatory lessons that we learned from I-SPY 2? They're highly relevant today. The study highlights the importance of prospective planning and predictive probability frameworks. It also demonstrates the need for clear subgroup definitions and statistical transparency. From a regulatory perspective, key areas of focus include biomarker reliability, control of false positive findings, and consistency with confirmatory development objectives. So moving on to the next example, I'd like to present the BATTLE trial. This was another pioneering adaptive oncology study. It introduced adaptive randomization based on accumulating biomarker information and tailored treatment allocation to molecularly defined populations of patients with non-small cell lung cancer. The study helped establish many of the concepts that underpin today's precision oncology programs. The regulatory lessons we learned from BATTLE provide several important lessons. Reliable biomarker testing is essential because treatment allocation and interpretation depend on analytical validity. Regulators also pay close attention to the subgroup findings and whether those findings can support meaningful clinical conclusions. The study reinforces the importance of strong statistical methods and governance when using adaptive randomization techniques. The next case study I'd like to present is the Recovery Platform Trial. The Recovery Trial demonstrated the power of adaptive platform methodologies during a global public health emergency. The platform allowed therapies to be added and removed efficiently as evidence emerged. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Recovery generated practice-changing evidence at unprecedented speed and scale. It showed how adaptive designs can provide rapid answers while maintaining scientific rigor. And from personal experience, the pandemic really showed us how we can move quickly throughout development. It really taught us a lot of lessons, and this is an excellent example of how adaptive design played into moving fast to find treatments for patients. So the regulatory lessons with recovery were successful platform trials require strong governance and effective management of master protocols. Investigators must ensure contemporaneous controls remain appropriate despite evolving standards of care, and this scenario and this landscape was evolving quickly. Transparency in adaptation decisions is critical for sustaining regulatory trust. And importantly, recovery demonstrated how adaptive approaches can support urgent public health decision-making. It was a very interesting time, and certainly one where we saw sponsors, CROs, and regulators all working together around the clock to find treatment. So we have many adaptive oncology registration programs. As I mentioned before, we see a lot of adaptive design in oncology and rare diseases. So they're increasingly appearing in oncology registration strategies. So multi-arm, multi-stage designs allow multiple questions to be addressed efficiently within a single program. Adaptive methodologies help optimize resource utilization and support faster decision-making. However, regulators continue to expect rigorous planning, robust simulations, and clearly defined adaptation rules. The seamless phase 2-3 dose selection example, we're seeing this a lot. These designs combine learning and confirmatory elements within a single protocol. The potential advantage is a shorter development timeline and faster progression from dose selection to confirmatory evaluation. At the same time, sponsors must address concerns related to multiplicity, adaptation bias, and adequacy of evidence supporting final dose selection. So early discussions with regulators is particularly important for these programs. We're seeing end of phase 1 meetings having these discussions. Things are moved up in the timeline quite a bit in terms of discussions with regulators, but it's critical that you get the design and agreement on the design up front. And again, as I mentioned before, thinking about where you want to commercialize the product, making sure you're getting input from those regulators and you're doing it sequentially so that you can design your trial to meet the needs of most if possible, all if possible, actually. So the future direction, looking ahead, adaptive methods will continue to evolve. We can expect to see a broader use of platform trials and master protocols, particularly in areas with rapidly changing science. Bayesian approaches and AI-assisted operational tools will likely support more sophisticated decision-making. Real-world evidence may become increasingly integrated into adaptive development strategies. And global harmonization efforts, such as ICH E20, should create greater consistency across regulatory regions. And that's really what we hope for, so that we can simplify this and meet the needs of all so that we can get these life-changing medications to patients faster. So what can we expect to see by 2030, which sounds so far away, but it's not. It's only 3.5 years away. By 2030, adaptive designs are likely to become more mainstream across many therapeutic areas. We see this happen often. I've seen it throughout my career, where you see uptake in a particular therapeutic area. In this case, we very often see it in oncology and rare disease, and then you see acceptance and more wide use throughout other therapeutic areas. And that is exactly what's happening with adaptive design trials as well. Regulators will expect increasingly advanced simulation strategies, rigorous risk management frameworks, and extensive documentation supporting adaptation decisions. Digital technologies, real-world data, and innovative trial infrastructures will become more central to development programs. And organizations that build adaptive design expertise now will be best positioned to compete in this evolving environment. And in my experience, one of the most exciting positions to be in is when someone hasn't done it yet. It is really rewarding and fun, in my opinion, to work together with sponsors and regulators to pave a path forward. So you're both learning at the same time. You're both trying to figure out the best way to go about it. You can learn from your mistakes and hopefully not failures, but with your mistakes, you can learn from them and move forward. But it's really a great position to be in, embracing the change and development and moving forward and working together in tandem with the regulators to pave the path forward. So key takeaways and conclusion, I'd like to leave you with 4 key messages. First, the draft ICH E20 guideline represents a significant step toward global harmonization of adaptive trial expectations. Again, as I previously mentioned, the local health authorities do have to incorporate these elements into their local guidance documents and local legislation. However, with the harmonization efforts with multiple members of putting these guidances together, it does set the stage for this to be more harmonized. Second, adaptive trials can offer major advantages, but these benefits depend on maintaining scientific rigor and transparency. It needs to be well thought out, scientifically justified, and certainly discussed with regulators early on. And third, success requires extensive planning, simulation-based evaluation, and careful governance. Finally, early and proactive engagement with regulatory authorities remains one of the most important elements of any adaptive development strategy. And I know I've said it multiple times, but it's honestly so critical to the success of your program. Thank you for your time and participation. I look forward to your questions.